He found a staircase in the lake. It still goes up. He did not see the staircase until the wind laid the lake down flat, a high mountain stillness that came like a held breath. It was late afternoon on Fontana Lake in western North Carolina, where drowned hills wear water like a borrowed coat, and the concrete dam throws a cold shadow that teaches you to look twice. The drought had been long, stingy, the kind that draws shoreline back like a tide that lost faith. Ansel Rook, 39, a surveyor who liked boats better than offices, let his rented skiff idle and watched the pale slope of silt with its driftwood teeth. Then the light tipped, and a line of gray stone showed under the green, not random at all, steps as even as counted breaths, leading up from water toward nothing that should exist. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? That October, 2022, the Smokies stood sharp against a sky the color of rinsed linen. The air smelled of leaf duff and gasoline and the faraway tang of rain that was always a rumor this year and rarely a fact. Ansel had driven out from Bryson City after lunch with a paper cup of coffee and a coil of measuring tape because the county had asked for photos of exposed foundations along the North Shore. The maps they kept were honest but out of date, and the lake was telling different stories every week. He wore a windbreaker the color of old blueberries, a hat with a frayed bill, and the face of a man who does not mind being alone if the work has edges. He cut the motor and drifted. The steps began in green water, a little deeper than a tall man's reach, the lake clear enough in that pocket to show the top 3 treads before light blurred into bottle glass. They continued above the surface, slick with algae at the line where water had been yesterday, then dry, then dusty, another dozen risers marching toward a slash of bank where saplings clawed at loose dirt. There was no porch, no house, no landing where a hand might reach for a knob, just a staircase that went up and then kept going as if the air were a hallway no one had told it how to be. Ansel nosed the bow toward the steps and let the skiff kiss the lowest dry riser. The hull made a hollow sound he heard in his knees. He stood, tested his balance, and stepped onto the first stone. It held. He took another. The risers were a hair shorter than modern code, built for legs from a different century. He climbed 10, then 11, then 12, a little more than a story, in a house that had learned to take weather as a sermon. He stopped where the steps met an absence and laid his hand on the sidewall that ran up either side like bones. Mortared fieldstone, careful work, the kind that starts with winter in mind. He looked back. The lake held his boat like a hand holds a toy. The dam stood off to the west, all angles and utility, its face unreadable. A loon called once far out, the syllable slanted and old. The stare made no answer, and that felt like an answer. He took out his phone. No signal, which is how stories get their chances. He knelt and ran his fingers over scrape marks in the treads where feet had once taught stone to be polite. He brushed silt from a riser with the cuff of his jacket and uncovered a line of letters someone had cut with a chisel and a spare hour. Willow Gap. The name felt right in the mouth. The steps had belonged to a place on a hillside that no longer agreed to exist. A truck rumbled on the scenic road above the tree line, then faded. Ansel stood. He is not a dramatic man, not a man who says the word haunted when the word history will do, but he felt a little movement in his scalp when his boot tried the next tread up and met nothing it could trust. He lifted his foot and set it again, and the soul found purchase on air as if stone continued in a material too stubborn for his eyes. He could feel something there, a resistance like the way a field of grass resists when you try to step through a place where deer have passed and the stems remember. He pressed. His weight held. He let it go and stepped back, heart knocking once, but not twice. He stood on the stair where real ended and whatever else began. The lake lapped below, measuring the hull against rock. A red maple leaf came down with dignity, landed on the 7th riser, and considered the long work of becoming loam. Ansel took a breath. He is a man who trusts second looks. He took one. The lake belonged to a body of stories people in Bryson City tell clean over pie. When the Tennessee Valley Authority flooded the valley to build the dam in the early 1940s, the town of Proctor had to move. Houses went down to foundations, barns left prints in the earth like giant hands, cemeteries were dug up with care and moved with ceremony, and some say not everything went where it should. On low years, people found stairs and walls, school steps, a chimney with a name carved into a corner stone. On foolish years, people tried to steal the past, and the mud stole them instead. The county kept a list of places not to be brave. Ansel is not brave. He is patient. He walked back down to the skiff and dug out the coil of tape, a pencil, a stack of flagging ribbon. He thought of calling the park office and decided instead to take his measurements first and be useful with facts. He worked the way surveyors work, lengths and levels, muttering figures under his breath in a rhythm that kept the mind from dramatizing. He wrote Willow Gap on a page and underlined it softly with the pencil because the stone had asked. He measured tread depth, rise, total run to the bank, distance to the current water line, the angle of the bank above the last step. While he worked, a wind came from the east and pushed the surface into a skin. The steps looked less sure then. He set a small cloth bag at the foot of the first dry riser, full of pebbles and a coil of bright ribbon, because people in the mountains know that small offerings are not foolish if they help you think straight. Halfway through, he heard a bicycle bell, clear, bright, a single ring. He straightened. The sound did not belong to a road. It had the roundness of a thing sounded in an open room. He turned his head the way animals do when they want to aim an ear. The bell came again, faint, then a child's voice without words, the way children announce themselves to their own day. The air held it and gave it back. Then nothing. He called out a simple hello. The sound folded into the trees and did not return. He is not the kind of man who says names into a lake, so he went back to his numbers and let the bell be a sound that remembered and moved on. At sunset, he drove back to town. He did not mention the staircase at the diner because new stories grow better if you give them a night to decide their shape. He took his notes to the tiny desk in his rental and drew the thing. He wrote in the margin a line that was not part of any job he had ever been paid to do. The stair goes up past stone. The next morning, the lake wore a fog that fell in slow exhalations from the coves. He put the skiff in early, coffee in a thermos that had learned to keep secrets. The staircase waited. He climbed to the place where his boot had found air the day before. He lifted his foot and pressed again and met the same soft resistance, like cloth pulled tight across a doorway. The fog gathered and thinned. The lake stretched one slow muscle. He set his palm out where a banister would be if someone had considered such things. His fingers tingled with the small current that passes through the body at the exact moment a man tells himself he will try something and believes himself. He raised his knee and stepped onto what was not there. The foot held. He set the other. He stood an inch above the last stone and felt a dizzy smile crawl across his face as if he had been younger once and forgotten how to be. He took another. The air had weight where the step ought to be. He felt it through the rubber of his boot, a density that said, I am not stone and I am not stone. He climbed 3 steps in air and stopped because he is not brave. Breath is a kind of data. He took it in. The fog thinned. The stair under nothing led to a landing that the mind made, whether or not the world did. He imagined a door where the sky was, just to see if the imagination would draw a knob. It did not. He stepped back, down onto the good stone, and laughed once, quietly, pointedly, the way you tell yourself you are still a person whose days have jobs in them. On the 3rd day, he brought someone. Ansel is careful about who he invites into something he cannot name. He called Lucienne Pike, 61, who ran the little historical society in town with the energy of a river in March. She wore a quilted vest and a wool cap and the kind of boots women earn by living here. She brought pastries because facts get hungry and people are nicer when their hands are busy. She listened while he told it. She did not interrupt. She asked one question with her head tilted like a dog hearing a violin. Does it go up? It goes up, he said. They went out together. The skiff felt lightly ridiculous under the weight of their care. The morning did the few small things it always does before it remembers it is in charge. The staircase was there, gray in the light, patient as a broom left leaning against a wall you forgot to keep. Lucienne reached the second riser and stopped, and with an odd humility, put her palm to the wall so the stone might recognize her. She climbed to the place where Air had learned a job. He watched her foot commit and hold. She gave him a look he will carry to his last morning. It had the quiet of a person who has been right about something important or wrong about something important and is making room for either result. She climbed one more and stopped. She did not push. She is not greedy. She came back down. Back in town, she made them tea in the society's office, which smelled of paper and lemon oil. She opened a ledger that had belonged to a church over the ridge that no longer stood. She turned pages until the binding sighed and laid flat, and then she tapped a finger next to a line written in a hand that had cared very much about straightness. Willow Gap Homestead, Brysonside. Stair and porch built by M. Garvey, 1931. Stepstones gifted by Applin sisters. She traced the names like a kind of blessing. People give names so the ground will keep them without bitterness, she said. Ansel told her about the bicycle bell, about the child voice that had no words. She nodded once, an economy that could hold an encyclopedia behind it. They found a photo in a folder of houses drowned to make the dam, a woman in a light summer dress halfway up a stair with a baby at her hip, and a boy of about 6 sitting on the landing with a tin pail, watching the photographer with straight seriousness. The steps were the same, the wall the same, the angle of the hillside the same, the lake not yet there to argue. Lucienne tapped a pencil against the margin of the picture and said the thing that opened the room. My grandmother told me she saw the army men come to measure in 38. She said a man from Willow Gap told them he would build his stair to the sky if it meant the water would have to think twice. She said he whistled while he worked, and his boy rode a bicycle so fast it learned the curve of the road and kept taking it when the road turned into a path and the path turned into a trail and the trail turned into someone's memory of a trail. She smiled with one side of her face. I think you found where the whistling goes. That night, Ansel dreamed slow water and a boy's bell moving away just fast enough to be allowed. He woke before dawn with rain, finally practicing its lines on the roof. He left the boat on the trailer and took the road along the river to the dam because seeing the thing that made the change is sometimes a cure. The dam looked itself, muscle and worry. Men in hard hats waved the way men wave when their hands are busy with ladders and they still have manners. The sky had put its gray coat back on. The rain lasted 2 full days. The third day broke open into a light that could make a shuttered room reconsider. He took the skiff out at noon. The lake had risen a hand's width and drawn a green lip on the lower steps. He climbed again. The air steps remained, not drowned by a little more water, not meek. He stood on the third invisible tread and spoke toward the place where a door might be. Not loudly, not foolishly. Hello, he said. Then, because the air had made him braver than he ought to be, he added, I can bring your names back to where people can see them. The lake answered the way lakes answer, by being present with everything around them without offering comment. He sat on the 4th stone step and ate the pastry Lucienne had tucked into his pocket as if she had known he would forget to eat. He tried the air with his palm again and felt, for just a fraction of heart rhythm, a shape moved across it that was not his hand at all. The story traveled the way stories travel when they are useful. Not online, not yet. In town, over paper cups, in line at the post office, at the walk-in barber with the fish calendar 3 years behind. People gave him their versions. A woman who remembered a man who remembered seeing a parade of porches floating like rafts past the bend when the first flood came. An old man with a face like a woodcut who said he used to fish off a stone stair when his father was alive, and that if you whistled the tune that man used, you could make the bobber nod. A teacher who had kept a box of rail spikes and marbles found on low years and said she would clean them and bring them by the society office so Lucienne could have them or pretend not to want them like she always did. In late October, with 2 hard frosts behind them, the county asked Ansel to guide a ranger and a structural engineer to the site. They went out in a John boat that carried its own echo. The ranger was a woman named Haynes who wore the park's green like a promise and carried the weight of a radio the way people carry their father's ideas. The engineer was a man with a gentle way of touching old things before speaking ill of them. They stood on the fifth stone step and looked up the ladder of air and did not mock it. The ranger wrote in a book. The engineer crouched and set a level on the second tread and laughed once softly when the bubble centered itself as if the past knew about precision. Haynes asked the question, stories have to survive. Is it dangerous? Ansel shrugged in a way that held 3 chapters. It is dangerous the way memory is dangerous, he said. It makes people want to keep climbing. It is dangerous the way stairs are when you forget you have a body with limits. It is not dangerous the way an alligator is or a bar fight. They set 3 stakes in the bank and tied flagging ribbon between, a line that told people who had to approach that someone else had been wise before them. Haynes asked for a sign, the simple kind that reads caution and does not attempt poetry. Ansel offered to come and keep an eye some afternoons when he had work nearby. She wrote his cell number in her book and tucked the pencil behind her ear in a way his mother would have liked. In early November, a fog rolled in low and forgot to leave. The lake became a page erased and written over, erased again. School buses turned their lights on at noon. The mountain that wears the dam as a decoration hid its fine line. Ansel kept away because the fog makes men do things they forgive themselves for later, and a man ought to reduce his opportunities for forgiveness if he can. On the first clear morning after, he went out early and found 2 objects on the 4th stone step that could not have gotten there by falling. A bicycle bell, rusted but round, the striker frozen in a kind of kindness, and a tin pail, the exact wrong size for anything useful, dented where a boy might have clapped it to make the sound bigger. He touched neither. He sat down. He greeted them with his breath in line, the way you greet animals that have decided to be near you. At 10, Lucien arrived with a thermos and 2 paper cups and the sort of force field that keeps good men from doing dumb things for no reason. She looked at the bell and the pail and did not pretend not to see them. She took photos that did not flatter the light and said the names in the ledger once. Lowe, Garvey, Applin, Willow Gap. She did not say a boy, she did not say a child. She put her hand on the sidewall and looked up the line of air with the plain candor of someone who has shored up more shelves than emotions and understands both. You can coax a story, she said, but not yank it. Take the bell to town. Leave the pail here for another day. We will see what the lake thinks of compromise. He took the bell gently, wrapped it in a handkerchief he had never found much use for before, and pocketed it like a chosen stone. Back at the office, Lucien set it next to a photograph and a typed card. Bicycle bell recovered from Willow Gap Stair, fall of 22, likely pre-flood artifact. On the card, a second line in pencil for people who read too fast. The stair goes up. In the second week of December, with the mountains blue as a bruise and the wind deciding to be cruel to make up for lost time, Ansel went out one last day before the holidays. He brought a crowbar because he had promised himself he would not bring a crowbar until the story invited one. He did not need it. The pail had sat, then vanished, then returned, then sat again with a rock in it a little smaller than a fist. He took the rock out and saw in the bottom of the pail, scratched by some patient hand or the work of a nail held at an angle, 3 words. Open in summer. He laughed out loud then. So loudly, a pair of ducks took off in a panic and told other ducks about him for an hour. He looked up at the sky, which had forgotten him to tend to larger business. He put the pail back on the step. He told it, with what dignity he could muster, that he would. Winter happened the way winter happens down there. One day, the lake wore a shell of rhyme like a dare. The next day, it rained hard as coins. Ansel worked a road job in the next county and came home tired to soup and a radio with the news that would not stop wishing it were better. He sent Lucien postcards from 2 counties over with sketches of culverts no one needed, and she mailed him back photocopies of ledger pages with red pencil underlines that made more sense than his own arrows. By late June, the water had climbed enough to lick at the 3rd riser and cover the 1st. The air above the invisible steps still felt like fabric pulled tight by a careful hand. School let out, and visitors came with coolers and the need to float and forget. Haynes put the sign back up twice. Ansel sat on the eighth stone step more than once and told people kindly that there was nothing up there for them unless they had time to spare and patience to listen. A few listened, most did not. No one fell, which felt like a policy. On a hot Monday, when thunderheads built tall and polite to the south and forgot to arrive, he took the pail and set it in his lap and used the crowbar not as a pry, but as a weight. He eased the thin tin sides apart where they had been pinched back over the lip like a secret. Inside, he found folded oilcloth, soft as a worn glove. Inside that, a photograph no larger than his palm, and a strip of paper with a line that looked like a prayer until he read it, and it felt like a list. The photograph showed the stair as it had been before the lake, the woman in summer dress and the baby at her hip, and the boy with the pail, sitting with a seriousness that has no word in English. The man who must be M. Garvey stood 2 steps down, hat in hand, as if introducing the stairs to whoever had the camera. Behind them, the ridge wore its trees in a confidence the mountains teach. On the back, in careful letters, someone had written, "So you remember how we looked when the water was a rumor." The strip of paper held one long sentence. When they came with clipboards, he whistled the tune about willow leaves and said he'd build the stair to the sky because steps are a kind of truth and the water would have to climb over the truth if it wanted to drown the house. There were names then, 3, the kind that drop out of families and get picked up by strangers who treat them right. He folded the strip back into the oilcloth and put all of it into the pail and set it on the step because the story belonged to the stair more than it belonged to him. In August, a lightning storm chewed on the dam and left it as it had found it. In September, a girl with a blue braid and a polka dot dress climbed the real stone steps and stood at the place where air did its work and played a penny whistle softly, 3 notes, and then a run. Her grandmother sat on the second step and wiped her cheeks with a tissue she pretended was for sweat. Lucienne watched from the bank with a composure she had purchased fairly over years of deciding when to speak and when to file. Haynes wrote a note in her book that read in an unsentimental hand, "Leave space here." The last time Ansel went before the rains came back for real, he climbed onto the 3rd invisible tread and set his palm out at the height of a child's head. He did not feel breath. He felt pressure. A small, exact pressure like the world confirming a measurement you would have sworn was off by just enough to drive you mad. He closed his eyes and saw the boy on the landing with the pail and the bell. He saw a woman take the last 2 steps at a practical pace, baby on hip. He saw a man look out at a hillside that had just become a lake and refuse to let the stair be anything but stairs. He opened his eyes, and the lake went on being a lake. There is not a larger lesson he can give you from this, except the one he wrote in the margin of his notebook after the 2nd week, a sentence he did not quite understand then and understands in the small of his back now. Not everything drowned. Some things learn to keep their shape in the air and wait for your foot. If you go to Fontana when the water is down and the wind minds its manners, you can find the stair if you ask the right person and you promise not to hurry. It will be there the way durable things are there, honest about their age, unwilling to entertain your stunts. You can put your boot on the 3rd step and feel something that does not owe you an explanation hold you anyway. You can look up at the sky and decide there is a door or decide there isn't, and the stair will permit either decision. You can listen for a bicycle bell and you may hear a loon instead, and that will be enough. If you tell the story afterward, tell it the way lakes prefer, with pauses, with dates spoken out loud so the years remember they are not just numbers, with names because names weigh the right things down. Say Willow Gap, say Garvey, say Applin, say a boy, though the paper does not give him to you. Say a woman moving with a baby on her hip and a list in her head and a refusal to shame the stairs with panic. Say a man who whistled a leaf tune and believed in steps the way people believe in scripture, not as decoration, but as an instruction on how to move the body when the body wants to quit. And if you find yourself on a day when the wind drops and the water stills, and you are offered the choice to test a step that does not belong to stone, ask your breath first. Make it even. Set your palm where a rail would be. Put your weight down like a promise. If it holds, climb one and stop. The air prefers people who do not need to conquer it to feel tall. Leave something small on the 5th step. A ribbon, a marble, A bell that waited in a drawer too long. Walk back down and let the day close the drawer. The stair will keep going up whether you are there to witness the miracle of plain persistence or not. That is how some things survive the flood. They decide to be their own house. They decide to be the part of the house you cannot drown. The hotel room that prints receipts at 17 amperes. M. The first night, the receipt printer woke her. It coughed once in the dark, warmed its little brass roller, and began to spit out a strip of thermal paper that glowed faintly like a cigarette behind cupped hands. The room clock said 2:17 in pale blue digits. Vesper Klein lay very still in bed 5B at the Scissortail Hotel, a brick-walled midtown remnant on North Boston Avenue in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and listened to the tiny buzz and chirp as the machine printed, paused, and printed again, as if it were resuming a conversation it had been having without her for years. Before we begin, tell me where are you listening from and what time is it there? She had checked in late after a client dinner that went long on promises and light on dessert. The year was 2019, early November. The air outside clean after a narrow band of rain slid through, and the sidewalks shone like varnished stage floors. Vesper was 33, a freelance systems tech who patched networks for small hotels that couldn't afford to be down and couldn't afford to hire someone full-time. She traveled with a canvas tool roll, a spare router, a zippered pouch of adapters that looked like a magician's deck, and a mug with a hairline crack she liked to think of as its signature. The Scissortail was her kind of place. A lobby with a brass bell that had learned restraint, a front desk shelf of paperback mysteries for the taking, a night auditor who watched the door like a friend watches a house while you're out of town. He'd been the one to hand her the key card and the 2-page Wi-Fi map, Quill Penner, printed on a plastic badge, as if the name might be borrowed for the night. Night auditors aren't chatty by design, but Quill had leaned forward when she asked for the room farthest from the elevator. He'd said 5B is quiet most of the time, then paused, weighing whether to add something. He didn't. He pointed at the coffee station and said, "The cinnamon packets are the good ones." The printer sat on the desk under the window, small and stubborn, the kind of ticket machine you see in diners and old theaters. No USB cable trailed from it, which made Vesper grin in the dark because devices without visible leashes are both a challenge and a dare. The narrow receipt paper advanced in 2-inch bursts. The room smelled faintly of dust and citrus, the ghost of cleaning solution, and something else warm plastic maybe, or the metallic tang of heat on a coil. She slid out of bed, toes finding the rug, shoulders remembering every winter morning she had reached for her hoodie before her thoughts. The window showed a slice of downtown in sodium yellow, a parked truck with a tarp that breathed a little in the wind, a streetlight haloed just enough to be kind. She stood over the printer and watched it work. The top of the fresh strip read guest ledger at the margin, then a line of text that made her blink. Check-in, Harlan Row, rate $14.50, room 5B arrival, the 12th of October, 1958, comments, 2 pillows only. The paper was unbrowned, the font bold. She knew thermal stock fades to beige with sunlight, goes blotchy with time, and curls if you leave it near a vent. This looked new, but the data was from a year you had to say out loud to make it believable. The printer hummed again and produced another line. Check-in, Odetta Meyer. Rate, $12. Room, 5B. Arrival, the 4th of May, 1957. Comments, traveling with songbooks. She tore the strip and laid it flat on the desk, then pressed a finger to the cool plastic of the printer, as if touch might confess what the eye couldn't. The machine did not shake. It simply waited, polite as a clerk, with more to say. At 2:23, it stopped. A little green light near its only button winked twice like a made-up code. Vesper set the paper on a coaster, lay back down, and stared at the ceiling where the streetlight's slatted glow made a grid like a rehearsal. In 2 minutes, the heater clicked, the mini-fridge answered with its own throat clearing, and her body did the sensible thing it does when a problem cannot be solved and the hour is improper, it slept. Daylight always rationalizes the night. Vesper showered, dressed, and went downstairs with questions arranged in her mouth as if they were items on a parts list. Quill stood behind the desk with a pen balanced across his knuckles like a small seesaw. Room 5B printed receipts at 217, she said, like a person reporting a minor plumbing miracle. She slid the strip across. He read it, eyes moving left to right once, then again slower. He did not touch the paper, as if touching would make him complicit in whatever time wanted. He leaned in. You know how old buildings have old anchor points. You hang a new painting, but the wall still remembers the nail. He lowered his voice. That room was a manager's office back when this place was the Francis Motor Lodge. They kept a ledger in there, typed out receipts on a half-width machine bolted to the desk. At close, they printed a roll of check-ins for the night, tore it, and rubber-banded the strip to the hardback ledger. Quill tapped the counter. Once, twice. I've heard the story since I was a kid, but the machine in that room was long gone when the Scissortail bought the building. That, he nodded toward the strip, is a thermal ticket printer from the last decade. We put it in to spit bar tabs during wedding weekends. He smiled without humor. The bar's downstairs. He told her what he knew, which was more than most people get for free before 10 in the morning. 2 nights a month, irregular but stubborn, the printer in 5B came alive at 217 and printed names from when the room was an office, and the office took cash, and the cash came with a handshake, and sometimes a song. Housekeeping had tried unplugging it, but the little machine held on to its paper and its green light like a dog holds a ball. Engineering had replaced it with a new unit. The new unit learned the trick too, as if the wire in the wall had a voice. Once, a manager put the printer in another room. It printed in the other room. At 217, Vesper asked the question an auditor would ask, "Why 217?" Quill lifted a shoulder. Night audit on the old system rolled it too. The manager, a woman named Adelaine Merritt, he wrote in her diary, he gestured toward the wall where black and white photos of the old Francis hung in frames. The audit took 17 minutes most nights because the room charge calculation was slow. He winked, a habit to soften hard edges. That's what the Haunted History Tour says anyway. My grandmother worked housekeeping here in the 60s. She said Adelaine was the kind of woman who could silence a room by looking at a clock. Quill slid the strip back to Vesper. I don't put much stock in anything that prints on its own, but I don't stay in 5B either. She laughed, but softly. I'm the right kind of superstitious, she said, the kind that believes in loose cables and also in writing down names. She folded the strip, tucked it in her notebook, and promised the front desk a stronger signal on the north wing by supper. Work made the morning sensible. Vesper crawled into the equipment closet on 5, balanced her laptop on an inverted bucket, and watched packets move in tidy lines across her screen. The Scissortails network roamed like a polite guess slow if you needed it to be fast. Fast if you weren't asking. She pushed a firmware update, tuned channel widths, stood on a chair to re-angle a ceiling antenna the way you point your head to listen better. Lunch came from a food truck with a chalkboard menu and a line that made the air smell like cilantro and good intentions. She ate on the loading dock, the sun finding her cheekbones and telling her to stop worrying about things no one pays you to worry about. The second night, the printer coughed at 2:17 on the dot. The room's clock, which she had not trusted since it flashed 12:12 after she plugged her phone charger, matched her wristwatch exactly. The printed strip listed names again, 5 this time, each with a rate that made the era plain. Miguel Corrado, Della and Sten Bay, Bellamy H. Cross, Traveling Sales, G. Whitlow. The comments field sometimes added a phrase that felt like a quotation. Traveling with songbooks, baby sleeps light, keep the radio low. She tore the strip and laid it beside the previous one. The heater ticked its approval. She sat cross-legged on the rug, laptop open, the printer's power cord draped across her thigh. If it's a room ghost, she murmured, it should ignore me. If it's a network ghost, I may as well listen. Her laptop saw the printer as a simple thing on the subnet, a networked ticket device with a default login and a queue history that should have been empty and wasn't. Vesper scrolled. A job log rolling back months logged exactly 2 entries each night with the flag source, Legacy. Someone had written a silly little module into the Scissortails aging property management system, a module that echoed old file structures for nostalgia tours during October. She'd seen that kind of thing done for fun. But this module contained descriptors she didn't recognize. Ledger spool, carriage return key, ribbon jam. These were words from a different machine. The audit program triggered at 2. The ghost queue called itself at 2:17. She checked where it pointed. The path wasn't a path, it was a device ID that didn't match any modern naming scheme. She pinged the device. No answer. She traced the MAC. The vendor code came back to a company that died before the internet had central registration. That made her skin feel too tight. In the morning, white coffee cups clacked, and the lobby television played low, the weatherwoman pointing at a band of storms where storms like to form. Vesper asked Quill if there were schematics for the old building. He pointed to the office behind the desk. Ground plan framed on the wall. Maybe useful. The hotel had been 2 buildings stitched at the seam. The Francis Motor Lodge on the east, a narrower annex that used to be a savings bank on the west, joined by a flyover corridor at 3 and a clumsy arch at 5. Room 5B sat where the old bank manager's office once had been, according to a penciled note at the edge of the plan. There, a scrawl, printer niche, in lighter pencil, spare line to basement. Quill warmed to the problem the way night auditors do when daylight invites them to be citizens. He called maintenance. A man named Orson arrived in a polo with his name stitched in blue and a toolbox that had its own opinions. Together, they moved the desk in 5B 6 inches and then 3 and exposed a painted-over conduit hole at the baseboard with a thumb-width chase running down into the wall. Orson whistled between his teeth. That's no Romex. That's armored cable from a generation that believed steel could keep time. He tapped the baseboard with the handle of his screwdriver. It answered with the hollow ring of an old closet. In the basement, they found the closet where the spare line went to not exactly die. The air was colder down there, humid the way the past is humid. A metal cabinet stood against the wall, padlocked, a gray panel humming like a neighbor practicing scales. Orson tested the lock with a pick he swore he hadn't lost. The door swung open. Inside, another little printer sat, twin to the one upstairs, its power indicator dark, its paper roll neat as a submitted term paper. A thin cable ran from a bracket down into a conduit box with 2 stories to tell. One was modern CAT cable, patched to the scissortails switch. The other looked like fabric-insulated wire on lead. Orson touched it with reverence and withdrew his hand. You shouldn't be alive, he murmured to the box. Then he turned to Vesper. Want me to pull the breaker for this room tonight at 2:15? See if it stops. She shook her head before she quite knew why. The motion felt rude. Let me listen once more, she said. Then, if it's a loop, we cut it. The third night, nothing is supposed to happen. Patterns prefer 3 as a way to make you distrust them. Vesper made tea in the room kettle with the cinnamon packet Quill had sworn by. She texted her brother a photo of the printer and a caption that read, Haunted Bar Bill. And he sent back the shrug emoji that meant, I love you, but weirdness is your brand. At 2:17, the printer began, but this time the sound rode a breath of air cold enough to raise her arm's small hairs. She stood close enough for the paper to curl against her knuckles and read each line as it arrived. Check-in. Adelaine Merritt. Rate. Comp. Room. 5B. Arrival. The 12th of October, 1958. Comments. Night audit. She reached for the strip and her fingers trembled, mildly, like a person handed the microphone at a small funeral. The machine whirred without printing for a count of 6, then resumed, the font just a touch lighter. Check-in. Quince Palmer. Rate $9.50. Room 309. Arrival the 12th of October, 1958. Comments, meeting at dawn. The room held its usual choir, fridge, heater, hallway, ice machine. 2 turns down, but behind it all, she heard a soft clicking. Not printer, not clock. Keys. The slow press and release of typewriter keys. Somewhere not in the room and not far enough away. She froze, because freezing is a way of letting more senses work. Her body made itself a listening instrument. The keys whispered. Again, 3 strokes. Pause. 2. The printer spit a final line. End of ledger. Prepared by A. Merritt. Time, 2:17 amperes, M. Vesper did what the body asks. She sat on the bed with the strip in her lap and waited for her breath to level. It did. The heater ticked, the fridge purred, the typewriter stopped pretending, the sound folded itself up and slid under the door. She slept because being a person who works with systems means you've learned to stack your fear on a shelf when there's nothing urgent to do with it. Morning turned the printer into a device again. She took the strip down to the desk. Quill stared at the word comp and the name he had heard his grandmother say on summer porches when the heat wanted out of the day. He asked to borrow the strip to show his manager, a woman with the fast walk gait of someone who plans 2 days all the time. The manager's name was Letha Croft, and she looked at the strip like a problem that could be solved with a memo. She was polite and firm. "We have tours on Fridays for the people who want goosebumps," she said. "We prefer to keep the goosebumps from rewriting our Google reviews." Vesper smiled, a tight little smile that said, "I won't post, I don't do that work, I just want to know what the wire knows." Letha sighed. The Scissortail was a college internship that never ended for her. The building was her thesis. She pointed at the framed photo behind the desk. Adelaine Merritt, hair pinned like a decision, stood at a wooden desk the size of a Buick, hand on a ledger book, face turned to a camera that had learned to respect her. The caption read, "Francis Motor Lodge, C1959, Night Manager." Letha lowered her voice. Family lore says Adelaine died at her desk in 2003 after the building had been empty 6 years because she refused to move a box when the bank wanted it. The family had the key to the back door from the old days. She snuck in sometimes to straighten things that did not require her. A neighbor saw her light. By the time anyone checked, the coffee had gone cold and she'd written the date on a yellow legal pad with a line under it, like an anchor. I don't know if the story is true. I do know names have a way of using rooms until you say them out loud and then they rest. That afternoon, Vesper sat on the floor of 5B with her laptop and a coil of patience. She sniffed the packets between server and printer and saw the little ghost job present a string of bytes at 2 minutes past 2, announce itself as ready at 2:16, and request the queue at 2:17 with a line that included a date spelled in words, not numbers. October 12. She set a capture to record it tonight. She did not know what she would do with the proof, but the act of capturing felt like putting a box around a wild thing without requesting its death. The fourth night, she did not sleep. At 2:16, the room gathered itself. At 2:17, the printer began. The first name landed like a quiet gavel, Harlan Rowe. Again, as if the ledger wanted to list the set that belonged with the date, as if the building had a playlist for that night and needed it to end correctly. The second name, Odetta Meyer. The third, Quince Palmer. The machine word, then it printed a line that wasn't a line she understood. Checkout, A. Merritt. Time, 2, 17 amperes. M. Balance, $0. Drawer, locked. The room changed temperature by a needle's width. The way a body registers changes a thermostat does not. The typewriter sound returned, louder, as if the keys had moved closer, as if someone had rolled the desk chair to the doorway. Vesper stood. The bathroom light made a rectangle on the carpet. She turned it off and let the room be only the room. In the dark, a kind of courtesy arrived. She spoke to the space like a person speaks to a skittish animal. "I hear you," she said softly. "I see what you print. If you're finishing something, finish. If you need a witness, I'm here." The keys worked once, gently. The printer fed a final inch and stopped. The heater clicked off as if called on. The fridge made a small, delighted sound, the way fridges do when they extract a victory from physics. Vesper lay down slowly, like a person trying not to wake a toddler, and watched the window make a square on the wall. She did not sleep much. She did not feel punished by that. On Friday, Quill called his grandmother. She came in with a smile that wore 80 years as if they were a favorite cardigan. Her name was Thalia Penner. She had hands that did hair buns right the first time and eyes that counted change without looking. She stood in 5B and curtsied to the air, lightly, like a joke only the past finds funny. She pointed at the baseboard where the printer niche had been long before this printer knew it was one. And she told a story the way people in the middle of the country tell them, in straight lines, with pauses for the parts that don't quite behave. Back when the Francis was a stop on the oilfield run, she said, Adelaine kept books for men who couldn't read receipts and kept rooms for women who didn't need to be asked why they traveled alone. She printed the audit every night, tore the strip, tucked it under the ledger ribbon, and locked the drawer. Her niece said she was proud of how long she could do the math in her headroom tax, city tax, discount for the flood man whose boots never dried. When the hotel closed in 1997, Adeline kept a key. In 2003, she came in one last time to make the numbers even. She wrote the date, she drew a line. She put her hand to her chest like she was looking for a pen and fell as neat as folding a shirt. The firemen took 10 minutes to arrive. I put flowers on the door, and then the bank put a new lock on the door, and then time put dust on the lock and years on us all. Thalia reached out and touched the printer as if it were the hem of a dress in a department store window. Adeline believed in drawers that closed, she said. It sounds like over again at 2:17, she gets to do that part, finish the roll, tuck it in, say goodnight to accounts. She is the kind of woman who would find that worth doing. Vesper spent Saturday building a workaround that no manager had asked for and no ghost could be fooled by. She pre-programmed a rule in the printer's network profile. At 2:16, the device would capture its own print job to a text buffer and email it to a special address she made for the Scissortail historian. Proof for people, paper for the room. At 2:15, she and Orson stood in the basement closet like two burglars having second thoughts. Orson touched the breaker switch. He looked at her. She did not nod. He did not flip it. Upstairs in 5B, the printer coughed, purred, and worked. Down here, the old gray panel vibrated, soft as sleep. At 2:20, Vesper's email pinged her phone with a single message. Subject, ledger. Body, 3 lines. Names, rates, the comp, the sign-off. Prepared by A. Merritt. Time, 2:17 amperes. M. She did not sleep that night. She didn't mind. She lay on the bed, hands behind her head, and watched the room recede from what rooms are in daylight containers, shelves, angles, and become what rooms are when you let them be churches. Limits, repetition, silence between notes. She thought about drawers, about the way her work was mostly closing things in the right order so strangers could open them and recognize what they saw, about how a hotel is a machine for forgiving you for not being home. On Sunday, she checked out. She left a thank you envelope at the desk with Quill's name written in neat engineer's block. In it, a printout of the email rule and a small drawing she'd made of the baseboard hole with an arrow labeled here, "The wire remembers." Quill held the envelope like it might be heavier than it was. Letha met her at the door. "I can't exactly put this in a maintenance request," she said, meaning the week Vesper had just spent listening to a machine be more honest than any of them owed their jobs. "But I can tell you what we can do. We can frame a copy of your email in the staff room and call it the drawer letter. We can show it to anyone who works past midnight and forgets that ending is a kindness. We can not run a Halloween promo in 5B because some stories don't belong to customers. We cannot unplug the thing that works for someone who isn't here anymore." Vesper smiled. That's more than most places do for the living. She drove out of Tulsa with the radio off, south, then east, then north again, the planes rolling around her like a low lullaby. She stopped at a gas station where the coffee was too strong and therefore perfect. She called her brother to tell him a story with no real twist and therefore true. She didn't say the name of the printer because sometimes a tool deserves privacy. She didn't say the name of the woman who closed drawers because she had said it enough. She didn't say 2:17 because she had learned to say it in her head as a kind of vow to be kind to the people who work at that hour. Months later, back in Tulsa for a different job in a different building, she walked past the Scissortail one evening just before Christmas when the lobby held a neighbor party. A small tree wore strands of tickets in place of garland bar tabs printed for fun, red inked with dates and little notes in flare pen script. Quill waved from the desk, a Santa hat angled to keep his dignity. Letha stood by the fireplace talking to a city inspector whose expression said he had learned to sleep at last. On the stair, a woman in her 50s, adjusting an ugly sweater, looked at Vesper in that way strangers sometimes look at one another, as if they had agreed to be in the same hallway before they were born. Vesper stopped in for a minute, She drank cider from a paper cup. She left before anyone could ask for a funny story with a good ending. She slept at a chain hotel by the interstate where the printer in the lobby spat bills for bottled water and where midnight meant nothing in particular. At 2:17, she woke and smiled at the ceiling, not because any machine had called to her, but because she had trained her body to stand witness for a time that belongs to other people. She poured water into a glass and listened to the small sound it made when it met the bottom, hollow turning to full. She said the name she had been given as if returning a borrowed book. She slept again. If you ever find yourself in a hotel room and a device on the desk prints at a time that sounds like a secret, do what Vesper did. Don't yank the cord. Don't film it for the internet like proof is a currency and this is your chance to spend. Sit up, put your feet on the rug, read the names if names arrive. If you can, make a rule that gives the living something to hold a copy, a note, an email to a person whose job is to remember. Then, let the room have its paper. Let the drawer close. Say thank you to the time that isn't yours. The night staff everywhere will feel it like a hand they don't have to see. And if you must know, it goes like this. The little green light winks, the paper unfurls. The names Harlan, Odetta, Quince, Adeline roll by, small and austere and whole. The room changes by a breath, the heater stands down, the fridge on duty hums, the typewriter in the wall or the idea of a typewriter slides one last carriage to the right and returns. The drawer locks. The ledger for that one night balances again. You will not have been asked to fix anything. You will not have been asked to believe. You will have been asked to witness. A job that counts. When dawn smears light along the window, when the city yawns and rolls, when the night auditor hands the keys back to daytime and goes home to sleep in a room with a plant that knows their voice, you will have been part of the smooth that makes this complicated world possible. Somewhere, a printer coughs once more, polite as always, and waits another 24 hours to do what it knows on the dot without apology. If, later, someone asks why a small hotel on North Boston Avenue keeps a finicky old ticket machine in a room that could rent for $2 more without it, you can say this. Not every device has to justify itself in money. Sometimes a machine is a ritual. Sometimes a ritual is a receipt that proves someone was here and did their work and went to sleep. And sometimes, at 2:17 in the morning, a woman who once locked a drawer she loved gets to do it again, which is as reasonable a reason as any you'll hear for anything that persists in this country, shaped by roads, rooms, ledgers, and the soft insistence of people who finish what they start. The babysitter heard a voice, "Don't answer the door." The first knock came at 8:53 on a rain-polished Saturday in late October, the kind of night in Portland, Oregon, when sidewalks shine and porches feel closer to the river. The house on Birch Hollow Court sat half a block from a small park that still carried the day's damp laughter. Inside, the dishwasher murmured, and a kettle tried to be brave. The babysitter stood in the kitchen doorway, one hand on the frame, listening because something in the sound at the front of the house asked to be listened to. The knock was polite, then it wasn't. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Her name was Isola Marin, 19. Art student, commuter, weeknight sitter for families who liked the way she paid attention. She had a way of noticing and then not needing to say what she had noticed. 2 children slept upstairs in rooms that smelled like clean cotton and a little of crayons. Oren, 5, a collector of sticks, and Juniper, 3, a thumbsucker who dreamed with her hands still resting on the bed rail as if the world might roll. Their parents, Elowin and Cormac Pike, had left at 7:15 for a long-promised dinner with friends on the east side. The year was 2016. When doorbells had learned to film you and phones hummed even when you wished them quiet. Isola had arrived early because she liked the first hour best when the house met you and you met it. The Pike's place had bones from the 1930s and confidence from a do-it-yourself remodel. A deep porch with a swing, pine floors that told the truth when the humidity rose, a narrow staircase that gave out a soft warning at the third tread, The front door had a knob smooth with history and a deadbolt that made a good, finished sound. Someone had left a bowl of apples on the kitchen island and a note in Elowen's looping hand, "Help yourself to anything except the chocolate chips." The note had a smile drawn like a quick breeze. There was also a line at the bottom that felt like it had been added while standing up. "If someone knocks and we're not back yet, don't answer." That line had made Isola breathe out through her nose, amused. Then the weather settled in, and the streetlight outside made the rain look like it had purpose, and she read the line again without amusement and put it into the pocket in her mind where she kept instructions that were probably not overcautious. The first knock came, then the doorbell. The chime had been replaced during the remodel and sounded like an idea of a doorbell rather than a doorbell itself. 3 notes, the middle one shy. Isola glanced at the hallway. The front camera should have sent her phone a picture, but her phone sat face down on the counter as an experiment in being a better person. She lifted it. No alert. No snapshot of a porch visitor wet with evening. She opened the app anyway. The screen showed a frozen image from 2 hours ago when the delivery driver in a yellow slicker had left a cardboard box and made a joke to the camera about swimming away. She touched the screen to wake it. It refused. The second knock came, not loud, but certain. She heard a hush behind the sound, no traffic for that moment, no neighbor's laugh, the rain taking a breath. "Coming!" she called, and heard the word bounce off the door and regret its volume. She crossed the living room, passing the lamp with the heavy base and the stack of picture books Elowen had left, lined up for bedtime like a plan that had already succeeded. She stopped 3 steps from the door, where you can still see the whole threshold and also the 3 framed photos on the wall to the right. Pike family on the Oregon coast, Pike family at a pumpkin patch, Pike family on a couch in this very room, elbows touching. The peephole showed dark. Not the dark of a coat, too close. The dark of rain pressuring the lens. She tilted her head to the side window, the one with the glass etched in a pattern of leaves. A shape stood on the porch, too close to see contours. Tall enough to be adult. Still, she thought of families who send a neighbor to drop off a sweater, of packages misdelivered, of jokes. She reached up, fingers on the deadbolt, and then the voice came from the stairwell behind her, even and close, a whisper and not a whisper, a way of speaking that used the room more than it used the air. "Don't answer the door." Isola stopped moving. The words had come from the landing, or the old heating vent in the hall, or the part of a house where stair and wall meet and decide to be patient. She turned her head, slow, like a deer deciding whether the sound belongs to a creek or to a person who has forgotten how feet work. No one stood there. Only the line of light from the kitchen, a run of framed children's drawings on the stair wall, and the slight turn of the banister at the top where a hand likes to pause. "Hello," she said, not loud, not questioning, simply acknowledging the world's habit of speaking up when you have one hand on a lock. Down the hall, the nightlight in Oren's room painted a small boat shape on the floor. She took her hand off the deadbolt. On the porch, the shape shifted its weight. The doorbell chimed again, 3 notes, the middle one shy. Isola's phone remained stubbornly uninterested. She felt her scalp fizz, as if the body were sprinkling sugar there. She stepped back 1 foot, then another, until the space between her and the door felt like a sentence with the right number of commas. She set the phone on the entry table and kept her eyes on the door. The shape did not knock again. "Can I help you?" she called, calm. "The owners aren't home." The shape made no answer. The rain decided to be louder for a few seconds, then took its apology and softened. A car passed at the end of the block, and its tires whispered on wet asphalt, then left them again. The shape did not say, "Leave this," or "I'm lost," or "Wrong address." It did not step down the stairs or shift toward the window to try a too close look. It stood. The voice from the stairs came again, almost the same, the almost important. "Don't answer ISO." No one called her ISO except 2 people who were not in this house. Not even Elowen, who preferred full names like a teacher who still missed a chalkboard. The nickname arrived and held. The quiet around it learned how to be heavier. Isola is not the kind of person who does brave for style. She does careful as choreography. She picked up the heavy flashlight from the umbrella stand and felt the weight in her fingers like a vote. She walked backward into the living room, never turning her back to the door until the couch was behind her knees. Then she set the flashlight on its end on the coffee table, ready to throw its beam like a purposeful animal. She tapped the phone awake. Now, the camera app sent an alert, but when she opened it, the image from the porch was empty but for rain. A rain curtain, the edge of the porch railing. No shape, no wet footprints on the mat when she zoomed, though that could be the grain of the old wood lying. The house held itself very still. Oren coughed once upstairs and rolled to a new dream. The dishwasher hit its dry cycle and made a small whir, as if about to tell a joke. Isola stood. She walked to the staircase and put her hand on the newel post because sometimes wood is better than a person's breath. She stepped up the first 3 treads, the third giving its soft warning, and peered down the hall. Juniper's door was open, just enough for night to move through. Oren's was open a little wider because he had insisted, recently, that he could hear better if the door learned to be brave, and no one had argued with the logic. "Thank you," she said to the landing. She felt ridiculous. She felt correct. The phone hummed. A text from Cormac, running late, dessert took forever. "You good?" She typed, "Yes." All quiet. Then after a second, a person knocked. Didn't answer. "All good." He bubbled back a thumbs up and a "let me know if weird." She did not type the lines she could not yet shape. She put the phone in her back pocket and went to the kitchen kettle. Tea might give the house another language to speak in. At 9:11, the sound came again. Not the knock. The dry slide of weight on porch boards, then a new voice, not in the room and not in the rain, a man's voice on the other side of the door, pitched to be reassuring and succeeding halfway. "Hey there," it called. "Sorry to bug you. My car slid a bit. I'm fine, just could I borrow a phone charger? Mine died." Isola stood very still on the tile by the stove. Charged phones. The sentence wore a coat of sense. It also wore the same coat a story uses when it wants to be invited inside. She felt the stair voice rest itself like a hand just between her shoulders. "Don't answer." "I can call a tow from here," she said. "If you tell me your name and plate, I'll call it in." A beat. The rain breathed. A neighbor's porch light clicked on 2 doors down, as if someone there had a similar feeling that night, should know it was being watched. "Sure," the voice said, cheerful, hurried. "Yeah, okay, appreciate it. I'm Kai. Plate is Washington, ZNJ." He trailed. The sound changed as if he had turned his head, as if reading something off a thing that had decided not to help him. "Hold up. Hard to see in the rain." "Okay," Isola said. She took a pen from the junk drawer. She did not step toward the door. The voice did not finish. The porch boards did the shift sound again, the one a body makes when deciding to step down, then silence, which is a choice. She waited a full minute and then padded back to the front hall, one foot making no more sound than the idea of a foot. Through the etched glass, she could see only the suggestion of a person-shaped absence where rain fell differently. The porch swing moved a breath back and forth, though she had not seen it move before tonight. She put her ear near the wood and did that thing you do against doors you don't mean to open. She listened to the hinge. She heard air. She did not hear breathing. She backed away because she did not owe the door any of the parts of her face. At 9:27, the voice from the stairs came a third time, and now it had a softness that made her throat ache. "Don't answer the door, Isola." "Okay," she said, and laughed once, not unkind. "Okay." She called the non-emergency line. The operator's voice was brisk, then kinder when she heard the children's ages. They sent a patrol car to cruise Birch Hollow Court. The officer rolled slow under the maples, touched 2 fingers to his brim up toward the windows like old practice, then slid away toward the park. He called to tell her he'd found no car in distress, no one walking in rain. She thanked him the way a person thanks another for being willing to be seen doing their job. At 10:09, something touched the back door. Not a knock, the whisper sound of a finger on glass. Isola turned off the kitchen light and let the room become a place where her eyes could do their best work. She stood behind the island and let one breath out, as if teaching her ribs a rule. The finger on glass again. Scrape. Gentle. A child in some houses might do that, playing ambush. But the child would laugh or give himself away with breath fogging the pain in a haunted oval. The voice in the hall didn't speak. It didn't need to. Isola aimed the flashlight at the floorboards and thumbed it on. The beam carved a clean white lane across the tile and into the mudroom, up onto the window, where a skin of condensation wavered on the glass like a thought. No face waited beyond it, only the moon in its nearly new mood, and the reflection of her own shoulder shaping into something braver than she felt. The scrape came again. The flashlight beam caught the faintest arc at the level of a hand. She walked a half step closer and saw what had made it. On the outside of the glass, pressed lightly against the pane as if placed, and then hesitated and then not taken away, was a leaf. A maple leaf quilted with rain, stem hanging like a punctuation mark. It trembled and dragged and lifted free. That was all. By 10:45, the children were deep in the kind of sleep that makes a house feel like it has set down a heavy bag. Isola sat in the living room and read 3 pages of a book without hearing a word, then closed it and looked at the door again and felt foolish again for looking at a door. She texted Elowen, "No rush, all fine." Their reply came in a minute. "On our way, rain slow, be home around 11:15, and wore the sound of people who have begun putting coats on." At 11:19, as headlights turned the corner outside and rain slicked away from tires and the familiar shape of the Pikes' wagon slowed by the curb, the doorbell chimed a third time. 3 notes, the middle one shy. Isola stood in the hallway, hand on the deadbolt, and looked through the peephole. The porch was empty, the wagon door closed. Cormac ran up the steps in a coat wet enough to laugh at itself. He patted his pockets like a magician who had dropped something essential. He had not rung. The bell had decided to make a ceremony for him anyway. Elowen kissed Isola's cheek in the open doorway and apologized to the night for taking their time. Cormac did a father's walk down the hall to glance into his children's rooms, even though he had been told they were sleeping. Isola told them the short version. A knock, a voice asking for a charger, a patrol car that had been kind. The line on their note she had obeyed in a way that made the marrow in her wrist feel hot. Elowen's mouth went still. Not hard, still. She looked toward the stairs like a person checking if water had been left running in an upstairs bathroom. "Thank you," she said. "I should have told you more about that line on the note. It felt like telling too much would make it silly, but I should have told you." "I heard a voice," Isola said, careful as she said it, ready to be believed, ready to be joked with. "From the landing. It told me not to answer. It knew my name." Elowen closed her eyes and nodded once. "Okay," she said. "Okay." They made tea. Cormac sat on the arm of a chair like a man who cannot bend himself small enough to fit back into an ordinary evening. Elowen told the story the way you tell one when you have lived with it long enough to know where its corners are. 2 winters before, she said, on a night when the river lifted itself and tried on a deeper voice, a man had walked the neighborhood knocking on doors asking for help. When people opened, he asked to come in and make a call, and if they stepped aside, he would cross the threshold with a speed that felt like another person had told him to hurry. Police had found him at the park pavilion where he had been sleeping rough, talking to a friend only he could hear. He never heard anyone, Elowen said, but the nights after that felt like a door with a hard-to-find key. 2 weeks later, Cormac said, picking up the part he needed to say, "We were here with a sitter, not you, a college kid named Pike, no relation, and something similar happened." Knock. Voice. He started toward the door, and Juniper, who was barely 2, sat up and said clear as a broadcast, "Don't answer, Daddy." She was barely speaking in sentences. She said it right. My mother's voice used to say it to me when I would go to the door for anybody. Something about the way Junie said it. It sounded like my mother and not like my daughter, and also like my daughter anyway. I didn't open the door. We watched through the side glass. There was nobody there. The bell chimed again. "And then," Elowen added, Last spring, when we were packing for a visit to my sister's, the doorbell chimed at 2:17 in the morning. Twice. Cormac checked. No one. Junie sat up and said it again. Don't answer the door. We changed the batteries in the chime, we changed the camera, we got smarter about being dumb. But the voice, it comes when it needs to. And she sleeps through it now. We hear it and we listen to it, and then we don't tell anyone because the world doesn't know what to do with a family in a sentence. They laughed softly, a release. The kettle sighed. Rain found a new tempo along the gutters. Isola told them about the man who had used the name Kai and about the way the shape had filled the porch and then been only Rain when she asked questions. She said the nickname the voice had used for her and watched Elowen's face widen in a slow astonishment that contained no fear. It knows, Elowen said. It knows who it needs to keep. They did not turn the story into an advertisement for another religion. They put the house back in order. Isola took the extra bills Cormac offered only after he insisted 3 times. She put on her jacket, damp from fear she didn't call fear, and stepped out onto the porch with them. The porch looked like any porch. The swing creaked because swings are built to do that, at least a little. The streetlight watched their car for a second, then got bored. Elowen reached for Isola's hand and squeezed, once, like a benediction you don't have to keep. On the drive home, the wipers kept time for a song Isola wouldn't have recognized if it had been played for her on a better night. She went under the overpass, where a man with a shopping cart had built a small palace of pallets and hope. She went by the open all-night grocery, where the cashier sells soup to people whose apartments never learned to hold heat. She went by a block of houses where the windows showed families still awake and not sorry. At a red light, she lowered her window and let the rain reach all the way in and touch her cheek, and then she rolled it back up and laughed, because the world had not insisted on being only one thing. The voice didn't follow her. It stayed with the house that needed it. Weeks went by without another knock at an odd hour. Leaves went to ground, and then to bags, and then to wherever leaves go when they've done their first job. On a Thursday in early December, Isola sat for another family across town and saw, on the neighborhood chat, a thread begin. Did anyone hear a bell twice last night around 2? The comments were predictable, then less so. A woman 4 streets over wrote that her grandmother used to leave a ribbon on the inside doorknob to remind herself not to open for kindness in the exact hour when kindness is most dangerous. A man who taught band at the high school wrote that he lived alone and still heard a voice sometimes when he put his hand on the deadbolt, and it always sounded like a person who had spent the afternoon organizing drawers and would simply not have the mess of a poor decision. Near midnight, her phone hummed. A text from Elowen, a photo of Juniper asleep on the couch under a quilt, toes poking out like arguments. Under it, a simple line. When she was half asleep tonight, she said, "Tell ISO thanks. The thanks is from me too." That winter, the door stayed a door. Spring arrived with a rhythm it was proud of. The voice came twice, each time for Isola, once at the Pike House, and once oddly in a different house where the rule felt the same though the picture frames were new. Don't answer. Each time she didn't. Each time the world failed to end. Each time she thought of how many doors in this country stand between people who need help and people who will offer it, and people who mean harm and the harm they intend. She learned something small and, to her, permanent. Safety and kindness are not enemies. They are a ladder. You step to the next rung when it will hold, not before. In late summer, after her semester ended and before the new one began, she took a train to see family in Eastern Washington. In the dining car, a man waved her to the empty seat across from him, the way travelers do when their stories want company, and she accepted. He was older, but not old, wore a ball cap with the logo torn off, and had one of those faces that make you feel remembered. He asked what she did. She said art and children and listening. He nodded as if that were a single profession. He told her he had been a night manager at a motel once, decades back, and how sometimes the night tells you who to open the door for and who to speak to through glass, and how your body knows if you let it be the first expert. He said his mother's voice still visited clear, not spooky, not the kind of thing you put in a movie, and told him the one sentence that she had left him as a tool, Don't answer the door, not because you aren't good, because you are. She returned to Portland with a sketchbook full of stairways and kettles and porch swings. She babysat for the Pikes the first Friday of October, a night with dry leaves and a moon that put on a mustache of cloud and then laughed at itself. The bedtimes went easy. The dishwasher hummed. At 9:14, the bell chimed once and stopped. She walked to the door and put her hand on the newel post and waited. The voice did not come this time. The house trusted her to have learned. She didn't answer. Later, when Elowen got home and leaned against the door while she took her boots off and said, "I love my boots and I love taking them off," Isola told her about the single chime. Elowen laughed softly and asked if she wanted pie, and they ate pie in the kitchen with their spoons, making small civilized noises, and the night minding its business. If you want a moral, there isn't one sharp and neat enough to slice bread. There is a sentence that belongs to a particular house on Birch Hollow Court, and maybe to your house too if you need it. Don't answer the door. It doesn't mean never. It doesn't mean be a city made of fear. It means listen for the moment your body tells you the story the night is trying to sell, then say no with enough steadiness that the night has to take its pitch elsewhere. If you are ever in a quiet house with children sleeping like small planets upstairs, and the door learns a new trick with its hinge at a time of night when even helpful people forget how to stand, and you hear a voice that knows your name and the shape of your life, let it be a chain on the inside, not a chain on the world. Make tea. Call for help you trust. Stay in the room with the light. Thank the air when it warns you, even if the thanks feels ridiculous in your mouth. Names will still be names in the morning, doors will still be doors. And you will have kept the lesson the old houses know. Sometimes the kindest act is to hold still while the night tries your latch and finds it true.